whatever it is, it's gonna be good.
Yeah.
And you just gotta pursue what God is calling you to do. So let's hear from you. Woo.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity again. I really enjoy this. In fact, I want to say something to you younger people, because when I was in high school, I used to come into this very room and get my hair cut. Dad and I would come in here, and well, my brother too, and get our haircuts in here. So it's like, I was sitting over here, and they cut hair over there. And I mean, I was a quiet person, and I didn't hardly say anything to anybody. But this just shows what God can do in a person's life. So I give all of this to God, because trust me, otherwise I wouldn't be up here. So, a couple of weeks ago, I originally was studying out of Colossians, a passage in Colossians to share with you this morning. And I probably watched too much news because I kind of got down, a little bit frustrated, a little bit angry about what's been going on. So I don't want to get into that. But I found myself being kind of a little bit down about all that. And all of a sudden I got into this verse, Psalm 45:1. My heart is stirred by a noble theme. And that just kind of helped me to come out of that. And then all of a sudden, it's like, for some reason, well, God does this, but the name Naomi shot across my brain. And I'm like, Naomi, that's the New Testament, which is fine. But anyway, so I went back and I read the book of Ruth, and it was like God was saying, right here. So this is what I didn't really come up with a title for this message. So I guess just for our use today, let's just call it Naomi, Boaz, and Ruth. Okay, so and what I like to do is just go through this and just kind of go, and I know there's a lot here, so I don't want to drag this out or prolong this, because I know this is a message, but just to give us a little bit of a background here of what's going on, Joshua led the children of Israel into Canaan, okay, and they were taking over their land. Of course, Joshua got old, anyway, after he passed away, between him and King Saul, there was no king in Israel. And what God was doing is when the people would start to drift away from God, he would raise up a judge to help bring them back again. This is the time period where you had Deborah and Barak, Samson, Gideon, among others. This is this time frame right here. This is the time frame when Ruth, this situation was taking place. So to give you an idea and to set the backdrop of this, things in Israel had gotten kind of bad because the people, when they entered Canaan, God told them, stay close to me. He did not want them to worship the idols and the false gods of the Canaanites that had previously been in Canaan. In fact, God wanted them exterminated. He wanted it eliminated, because he knew that if any of them were left alive, eventually they would lead the heart of his people away from him. And that's exactly what happened. They didn't obey God's command to rid those people. So anyway, Judges chapter 21 verse 25 says this: in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. So that creates chaos. I mean, we can kind of see that in our day. I'm not going to go into this a lot, but we see that today. Everybody's kind of just wanting to do their own thing, and there's this thing everybody keeps saying about, I speak my truth, or my truth, your truth. And it's like, I'm not quite even sure what that means. Because there's only one truth, and that's God's truth. And we either go according to his truth or we don't. So there's only one truth, and we either have it or we don't. So there was some anarchy. In fact, I read the complete book of Judges to prepare for this, and I hadn't read Judges for quite a few years, and I kind of forgot how wild it's kind of got in that book, you know. I mean, there was really God was really moving there too, you know. He would send like a theophany, that's like an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ, and a pre-incarnate vision of God. It wasn't a vision, he actually appeared. Appearance is what I'm trying to get at. So God was working there, but the people just constantly, you know, they would rebel and they'd drift away from God, and God would allow some foreign nations to come in and kind of harass them, and then the people would cry out to God, and God would come in and he'd raise up a judge, he would draw them back to himself, but then pretty soon they just kept drifting and drifting and drifting. The problem is that each time they followed that pattern, they sunk deeper and deeper into depravity. It got worse, and each cycle got worse and worse and worse. So it became a situation where they say even traveling on the roads, you know, in Israel was difficult. It was actually dangerous. You could be robbed or worse. So that's a situation that we find these people find themselves in here. So if you want to read along with me, Ruth chapter 1 verse 1, it says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab." If you can just feature this in in your mind, Bethlehem was west of the Jordan River. Just to give you kind of an idea, if you go east of the Jordan and a little south, that was the country of Moab. And Moab was a godless nation. In fact, it had a really bad start. I don't know if you recall that, but I won't go into that part. But anyway, they had a lot of false gods there. They did not worship God. Okay, so they had their false gods. So this man decided to take his family there. Now, different scholars have a different view of that. Some believe he should have never done that. That wasn't wise. I don't know. The point is, they went. So, but we're going to see God do some amazing things through that, though. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women. One was named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and husband. So that puts her kind of in a perilous situation, you know, as far as, you know, making a living, earning money, so forth. You know, that day was different than now. There was no such thing as welfare. They had to rely on family members. But of course, her family is back in Israel. So she's in this foreign country without her husband and 2 sons. Verse 6, when Naomi heard in Moab, when she's living in Moab, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing for them, God sent rain into Israel again. So they were starting to produce crops. So there was food there again. So she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home." May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. So Naomi loved her daughters-in-law. And she was thinking, you know, it's better if they stay here than coming to Israel because they were foreigners, they were Moab women. She wasn't sure how they were going to be treated in Israel. You know, foreigners coming in, you know, we kind of get that thing. But, so she was encouraging them to go back so that they could find husbands again. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, verse 10, and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. This just shows what her daughters-in-law thought of their mother-in-law. They loved her too. I mean, if they didn't like her, they'd be like, no, you know, we're staying right here. We're not going anywhere. But verse 11, but Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Verse 15. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Now this, we get a really beautiful picture here of Ruth, despite the fact that she was raised in a godless nation, a godless society. At some point, she put her faith in God. And this is the beautiful thing, because if you look at the second word there in verse 17, where it says, the Lord deal with me, that's the word Jehovah. And Jehovah is the word that describes God as a relational God. So when she was using that word, she was expressing a personal relationship with him. I mean, that's, you know, can't miss that. That's really significant there. Verse 19, so the two women went on until they came back to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women explained, can this be Naomi? Now remember, the name Naomi means pleasant. So obviously she apparently had like a pleasant demeanor about her, because those names back there meant something. And so Naomi comes back. First, verse 20, Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. And that name Mara means bitter. So see how you know, she had some adversity in her life, and see how it's kind of changed her? Because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, as we're going to find out, Naomi was still walking by faith. So she never turned her back on God, but she had, you know, questions. And I mean, I don't know about you, sometimes I have that if I'm going through adversity. It's like, well, does he still love me? Is he still in favor of me? So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Okay, this kind of sets the tone for the book. Now we're going to start to see things kind of pick up. And it's interesting to watch this. So chapter 2, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So, as close as I can, as I've read, Boaz's dad and Elimelech were brothers. So Boaz is a pretty close relative here. And he was obviously a pretty wealthy landowner. But even more so than that, he was a godly man. And Ruth, verse 2, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." So, I mean, we got to put this together. So they come back and, they didn't have any food or not much of it. So Ruth is the personality type. She was like, she didn't just come back with her mother-in-law and say, "Okay, take care of me." No, she was like, "Let me go out to the field," because she wanted to provide, well, obviously food for her too, but also for Naomi. She wanted to take care of Naomi. Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter," verse 3. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. So the field that she walked into was just a random field. Okay, the field that she walked into, she did not know whose field that was. Let's put it that way. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. So we start to see where God is providentially working here. God did not just leave Naomi out on a limb. He did not leave her there. He was still taking care of her. Verse 4, just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" Now, undoubtedly, he just came from Bethlehem, so he heard the stir about Naomi and some young Moabite woman coming back. And so he gets to his field, and he sees a new person out there, who happens to be a young lady, and maybe he could tell she was a foreigner. And he was like, "Is that her?" Right? So the overseer replied, verse 6, replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning until now, except for a short rest in the field. One of the things that we're going to see, folks, is all of these people were people of character. They were noble. That's it. Maybe that's why God connected that in my mind from Psalm 45. My heart is stirred by a noble theme. These people had character. And we're going to see this as we go along more and more all the time. We see here that Ruth was a hard worker. She was diligent. Okay? And that's going to play well for her because she's in a foreign country. And again, these Israelite guys, especially, sometimes you guys can do this, unfortunately, but they could have been insulting her or putting her down or something, right? They weren't doing that. They were, I think in a sense, they were impressed with her because she was a go-getter. Verse 7, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Verse 8, "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work with me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled.